Find everything Marc Cox at 971talk.com/Cox.
At least in the first 2 years, I had majorities of my party controlling Congress. And I'm just one country. So Congress is hard to deal with.
If you're feeding a person a crap sandwich with a smile, it's still a crap sandwich.
All right. Thank you very much, Colonel West. We appreciate that. That is President Obama speaking during his trip to Greece about the difficulty of operating in the America. So apparently that it's a problem that you have a Congress, House, and a Senate that you have to deal with to get things done, because he had a hard time doing that. The exception of Obamacare. That's the only thing he got done his first 2 years, right?
You had to change the rules a little bit to do that.
If we could just change the rules. It'd be a lot easier if I was the decider. Isn't that what George Bush said?
Is Eddie Money in town?
No, I don't think so.
That's like two back-to-back.
That's okay. Rose is a big fan of Eddie Money. This is 1980s Tuesday, apparently. She's hit me up.
I thought maybe Eddie was in town, and I missed it.
We're going to play some Jefferson Starship coming up, aren't we? We were talking about that earlier. That's good. I got a little preview of the bump music when I walked in. Rose is in here rocking out in the studio. So, see, when you're the daughter of Radio Rich, that's what happens to you. You love 80s music and rock and roll.
You can't go wrong with Eddie
I'm
Money.
telling you, absolutely. Give your dad our best, by the way. That's awesome. So, you were on the BBC doing an interview just before this show.
I was.
What kind of vexing questions was the BBC asking you?
Well, I was on BBC the day after the election, and they were very surprised that Americans voted for Donald Trump. And I think this was a continuation because they're still in shock.
They still can't. They think that something had changed since the last time they talked to you?
Well, here's what they think now. It was the fake Facebook news is what swayed people to make them vote for Donald Trump. And I had one lady that was debating me. She was British, and she was like, well, all of my American friends that I talked to, that's not the sentiment that they had, and blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, well, who are the Americans that you're talking to?
What sentiment? What sentiment were they talking about?
Well, they were talking about the Facebook news didn't have an effect on the election. And she was saying that all of her American friends were saying that they think it did. And I'm thinking to myself, the Americans that you're probably talking to aren't flyover St. Louis, Missouri Americans.
Probably not.
That I'm talking to.
But who gets their news from Facebook? That's still what I'm trying to get back to here. What's the fake Facebook news?
Well,
like I saw this week that somebody posted on there some link that Bernie Sanders there's a loophole that would allow Bernie Sanders to become president instead of Donald Trump. I mean, if you believe that garbage, I got some swampland in Florida I want to sell.
But it is true, though, that 62% of Americans do get their news from Facebook or Twitter, and there's 315 Americans in this country, but there's 322 million cell phones. So there's more cell phones than there are people. So you could see where they could try to make that argument that people got their news from that. But I argued I didn't think so. I think that people that believe one way or another weren't going to be swayed by fake Facebook news. And if you look at Donald Trump, as successful as he was doing social media and the operation research that they had, they would have came out and refuted any of this fake news and would have reached 70 million people and refuted it all. So I don't think you can blame it on fake news. It's
embarrassing.
I told the lady, I said, the conservatives have been dealing with fake news reports for decades. From the three major networks and with cable. And she was like, well, just because it's not a favorable news report doesn't mean it's fake news. But I'm like, yeah, well, remember George Bush and the National Guard story? That was a fake news story. That wasn't an unfavorable news story. That was fake.
And a major news anchor lost his job over that,
exactly.
didn't he? Yeah, that's about when Rather got bounced, wasn't it?
Yeah, but it's fun always talking to them about American politics in between trying to understand them at the same time.
It's probably an amplified version of what I experienced in New York City this weekend. People were still in a stupor over the whole thing. I don't know if you heard me say this, but I went to a comedy club while I was up there. It's one of these places where, like, you're there for 90 minutes or so, and 5 or 6 different comics come through the room while you're there. And 4 of the 6 tried to make Donald Trump jokes, and they got mixed reaction from the crowd because you've got people there from all over America. But I think that these comics up there were in sort of a little bit of their own vacuum in New York City, and they assumed they were going to crack up the whole audience, and that's not what happened.
Well, did you hear what happened yesterday? Wanda Sykes.
I did.
And she
got booed, didn't she?
Yeah, she's dropping F-bombs on the crowd because she's going off on Trump, and I think a lot of people, this was a tough election, very personal, but I think Americans overall want to give their new president at least a chance. Some, you're going to have those in the hard left that are like, he's never my president, let's burn the whole thing down. But I think Americans in general are saying, hey, he said some stuff we didn't agree with, but he's a new president, first new president in 8 years, let's give him a chance. That's kind of where I'm at this stage. Yeah,
well, let me get to a couple of phone calls here. People have been holding on for a while. Eric, you're on the air.
Hey, Mark, how you doing today, brother?
Good, thank you. What's going on?
Hey, I heard a promo for your show when you referred to these people as protesters. Can I politely correct you?
Please.
And suggest that they are temper tantrums? Because you recall when Obama won, we all ran into the streets and cried and held up signs and yelled. And
we did?
Said he's not our president, remember?
Yeah.
Well, sarcastically, we all ran out there and said he's not our president. The conservatives did. So, it doesn't make any sense to me how they're getting away with all this stuff. This is just organized temper tantrums.
Nope. Eric, you hit that one right on the head. I've been saying that for a couple of days now, that it's an organized drop and flop, and it's completely excused by the mainstream media. The president, to his credit, has tried to express to folks that he supports the smooth transition of power. This is what happened. We don't like the outcome. Maybe he hasn't been as forceful enough about it as I would have liked, but at least, he's not encouraging them. Yeah. That's for sure.
And to me, it's like, what are you protesting? There hasn't been widespread cases of voter intimidation or ballot dumping or any type of fraud. It's like the man won fair and square. What are you protesting?
Somebody put a piece up yesterday, tongue-in-cheek, on Facebook, that said that they've reversed it and decided to take the World Series trophy away from the Cubs and give it to the Indians because there have been protests all over Cleveland about it, and it just wasn't fair. And when they went back and tallied up the run total between all 7 games, right, both teams scored 27. So since it was a tie anyway, and the people in Cleveland are sad, they're going to take the title and give it back to Cleveland because it's just about as ridiculous.
As long as Chicago gets a participation trophy, then
I know,
and then it's okay.
I know. Zach, thank you for calling.
Hi, Mark. A couple things I wanted to say. I'll keep it brief. One, I called in about that Darryl guy earlier, and frankly, I hope the subject keeps coming up because it's a perfect opportunity to point out the origin of the KKK, which is the Democratic Party. And I am not a hardcore Republican, so believe me, I've been apologizing ever since I voted for George Bush. But that was one thing. And then a little story, a little personal story. I'll keep it brief again. I keep getting called a racist and all these other things, just like the rest of the people who voted for Donald Trump. When my family's been fighting slavery since the abolitionist movement. My great uncle was Arnold Krekel, a judge who voted to free Dred Scott, and the federal government overturned that. And he was a Republican and an abolitionist. And Dinesh D'Souza's movie puts it together very nicely for all of the people who are very confused right now and seem to think that we are the racists. They are actually supporting the progenitors of the KKK.
Yeah, Zach, appreciate you pointing that out. And, the thing that's important about that, and I saw Hillary's America. Did you see that movie?
I have not.
I'd recommend that people go see it. It doesn't really have anything to do with Hillary Clinton. And it's weird that Dinesh D'Souza picked that name for his movie. Maybe he just wanted to drive more people to the theaters. Right. It has more to do with the Democratic Party, the origins of the Democratic Party, and his basic theory is the Democratic Party hasn't changed. It's just changed tactics.
I agree.
And, what Darryl said earlier was that he was sitting in an airport somewhere listening to Jamie's show, I guess on podcast, and the guy sitting next to him ended up being some sort of a white supremacist who is coming to St. Louis and wants to stir things up, and he was almost acting like that individual is somehow the stereotypical Donald Trump supporter. And that's the image that the media wants to paint about this, but I don't know anybody like that, and I know a lot of people that voted for Donald Trump.
I look on the bright side about Daryl. Is Daryl is a conservative, as he says. He's not a Democrat. I think he sees that the Democratic Party has taken black folks for granted for a long time. And he is open-minded enough to listen to this radio station. And I think and hope that there are thousands of other African Americans that are listening to this radio station for an alternative voice. And I think it opens up the discussion that we need to have in the future, is that not everyone is going to be hardcore conservative, or not everyone's going to be middle of the road, that the Republican Party is a big tent, and that voices like Daryl, who may not as conservative as we are, need to be included and listened to so we can broaden that tent.
Yeah, Daryl says he is a conservative, though.
Right.
So I don't know. But that's a good point. I'm glad that you bring that up, and hopefully people keep that in mind moving forward. Chris Arps, great job as usual.
Thank you for having me.
Go to Twitter at Carps, at C-Arps, and
like the fish.
Follow him on Twitter, just like the fish.
You have some Eddie Money music to bring me out?
I don't know. Does she have some? Really? Go ahead, hit it.
Surprise, surprise.
Thank you. How about that? She was ready for you, man. That's great. All right, still ahead, we're going to talk to